Hello and welcome to the session. I'm going to focus on LiveCompare's continuous impact analysis with a primary focus on the developer impact analysis. So let's begin by just taking a look at a high-level change request process. So let's just say, for example, on Monday, a change request was submitted. On Tuesday, the code was committed to dev. The task was released in SAP development. Wednesday was a day to address any issues that come up during unit testing or any other additional quality issues that surface. Thursday, we're ready to release the change into QA for regression and user acceptance testing. And Friday, we'll release the change into production. And with LiveCompare, you'll have a greater probability of not having any defects as you release that change into prod. So when we look at the SAP pathway to production overlay, where the change takes place, we can see that here in this graphic. And in this scenario, we recommend running impact analysis twice. Now, the first time, you want to run it as it's being committed in development, just so we can surface any issues really early and understand the scope of change to production. So these are the types of things that you want to have visibility of early in the process. It's that whole shift left mentality, address issues while they're in development because they're much more expensive in QA, sometimes up to 10 times more expensive, and up to 30 times more expensive once the change is released to production. So why do we like to run impact analysis in development? Well, this will give us visibility on what has changed. We can understand the scope of impact to production. We can auto-run some SAP ABAP unit test and identify any quality issues. And the second run of impact analysis is to more understand the risk to your business processes, prioritize at most at-risk testing, and determine your test coverage, whether you're using Tosca or Q-test, and have an understanding of what tests need to be executed. And if LiveCompare has identified any executables as most at risk, and if you do not have test assets for those executables, those would be considered gaps, and we can populate your testing tools requirements folder with those gaps. Here's a snapshot of an SAP environment, and I just want to point out that we're talking about continuous impact analysis here, and this is completely automated. So when your developers or configurators or folks from security release an SAP task transport in development, at that point, LiveCompare would analyze the change automatically. Okay, and on the right-hand side, we see the parent of the task, transport ending in 550. That's the request. When that gets released, that in general goes to QA for further regression testing, and that supports the second run of impact analysis. So here's a summary. So once you click on that transport icon in the upper right there, LiveCompare analyzes the change, and then it populates your dashboard with a summary of the change, the system. You can see how many objects have changed and how many objects are impacted, and then you have your date and time. Okay, so now let's get into the details of the developer impact analysis report. So when you actually click on the link here with the system name, you would then download the Excel spreadsheet. So let's take it from left to right. The first column is the task transport ending in 548. We can see the owner of that transport, Pete James, has released that task in production. The transport task contains 4 objects. 3 of them are programs, 1 of them is a class. We can see the changing object's name as child name, and that's a hyperlink. And if you click on the hyperlink, you can then see how that code has changed. So this particular class, zcalc, we can see lines 117 and 18 have changed in the code. So that gives us visibility of what the transport contains, what objects, and specifically the code change within those transports. The change type is ABAP. This class has one impact to production. So we can see the class zcalc. At a depth of 2, it's called by transaction ZVA91, the sales calculator. It's used 139 times in production by 5 different users. It's a sales transactions from the ZUnitTest dev class. It's custom and it is most at risk. So with that, we have visibility of what's impacted in production. In this case, it's just one T code. But if we look at that first program, ztestcalc, we can see it impacts 21 executables that we use in production. Now, this might be a scope increase, right? Maybe that was more impacts than you would imagine, and maybe you need to reevaluate the change or at least notify other team members or functional areas of their impacts to their executables. Next, we have the unit test framework. Now, this is an SAP feature that if you have it enabled in your code, we can automatically run that SAP unit test framework unit tests. And for this class, actually for the program, we see it breaks down into 2 classes, and each class has 3 methods. And that's why you see 6 lines here, because we're looking at every individual method within the class, within the program, and we're running that through the unit test. Now we see that there are some failures and exceptions. Runtimes and warnings seem to be clean, and you can get details of what those failures and exceptions are. The last column here is the ABAP quality analysis, the code quality analysis. And there are close to 200 rules that we check, including performance, reliability, security, HANA readiness. And the purpose of this analysis is to surface any quality issues now while you're in development so you can address them here. Same with the unit test. So all of this information is to provide you with the analytics needed to make sure that your code is optimal and it has the appropriate impact to production that's in scope for the project. So another few notes about the SAP unit test framework. So this is an SAP feature. We can see I ran the same program with the 2 classes and the various methods inside, and we can see how it looks in the SAP GUI. So we're just surfacing that information within the report automatically as you're releasing the task into development. And for the quality issues, we can see here all the top categories that we organize, all of the close to 200 rule checks. So I just expanded the HANA check there, but you can see we have things for complexity, missing code, obsolete features, performance, reliability, and so on. Now, developer impact analysis also supports all the BW changes. And this diagram illustrates that it's not just the ABAP stack that can impact your key BW areas that you would test, things like queries, info providers, and calculation views. It's also in your HANA database where calculation views are being updated, maybe through Eclipse or some kind of studio. So LiveCompare has an RFC connection into your ABAP stack, remote function call, and also a HANA ODBC connection to your HANA database, just so we can cross-reference how those changes outside of the ABAP stack impact your queries, info providers, and calculation views. I like to use this graphic as another view. Think of your queries and info providers and calculation views in BW as the testable surface area. Just like transactions and Fiori web apps and executable programs, APIs, are the testable surface area in ECC and your S4 core, and also your Fiori front end. Now below the testable surface area is the where the changing objects often occur, down deep in the app framework and environment. So an example of this would be a routine, a really popular object to change in BW. In fact, this is the top object that we see when we examine our customers' transport logs for BW. Routines are always on the top 10 list of object types that are being changed. And all those other changing objects are BW objects that LiveCompare supports. So we can roll those up specifically to the calculation views that invoke them. So an example of that, we have now these BW transports, and we can see the child name there. That's the ODSO object that's changed within the transport. So it's a data source object. And below that, we can follow the red line. We can see how that code has changed within that data source object. And then across the top, we see queries are impacted, info providers, and the very last row or last column is your calculation view. And well, first let's look at that top row. We can see 2 queries were impacted. Those queries in the 5th column, you can see the ELM. ELM is the technical type for queries. So Z query 1 and 2 are impacted, and there happens to be 5 tests for Z query 1. Now if we look at the calculation view that's impacted, the very last column, very last row, if you click on that one, we see that here's a transport with the transport number, the data source object, the object name, and at a depth of 5, we can see the calculation view, CV display, that invokes that data source object. So that's an impacted calculation view. This calculation view, when we scan, say, QTest or Tosca, has 4 related tests. So we show you your test ID, the test name, the test path, and of course we can automatically execute the impacted test within your execution list. And if you don't have tests that cover this particular calculation view, we can populate your requirements list within Tosca or QTest. Okay, I want to stop here and log into first SAP. All right, so let's just say we go into SAP and we look at our modifiable transport tasks. Okay, we see here one that hasn't been released. The one on the bottom has a check mark. That means transport task ending in 611 with these classes and programs. These have been committed to development. This task has been released in development. Now let's say we want to release this task into development. Well, then we would click on the transport and then click on the release. Of course, we also support transport management tools. Most popular these days is Solution Manager Charm. So if you're releasing your change, whether it's a normal change, correction, whatever, in Solution Manager Charm, that would also release the transport, and LiveCompare would also support that scenario. So let's say I release this task transport. At that time, LiveCompare will now recognize that there is a released transport task. So it will look at the system that you're in. It'll say how many objects were in the transport and what the impact to production is. And you can see all the different task personas or categories on the top. So we have one for developer, configurator, and InfoSecurity. This particular session is focused on developer impact analysis. So when I click on this link, I get the pop-up for the spreadsheet with all of the all the information that we reviewed in the slides. So again, you can click on any one of these objects here. This particular program, Z test class 1. We can see lines 27 and 28 have changed. So that's the visibility of the change there. And if I click on the one here, I can see the transaction that invokes the change. By clicking here, I can see the 5 users that execute the transaction, ZVA91. And I also have information about its application area, dev class, its custom status, and its most at-risk status. If I wanted to see the unit test information, I would click here, and quality issues I can see here, and you can drill down into the details within these categories as well. So that's the developer impact analysis. I'll just touch real quickly on the other personas, like the configurator impact analysis. So let me go back to LiveCompare. If you click on configurator impact analysis, you would see all of the change events that have to deal with data related to IMG configuration change. So when you click on any one of these links, you would get a report that looks like this. So instead of types of ABAP programs and classes and functions, includes, BAPIs, we see tables, because that's what configuration is. It's table data related to configuration in your IMG. So the TVAC table has changed here. AUART is the sales doc type, TA, and the change has to deal with the lead time in days. We added 99. So you want to test all your scenarios that interact with this data. And that's what the rest of the report will do. So we see the change type is config, and then the impacted objects, 3 here, we can see the 3 transactions that invoke that config change. And then we see the 6 tests in Tosca that not only cover VA01, because you could have hundreds of scenarios that cover VA01, it's filtered by just the test that has the data, right? That interacts with sales doc type TA. So these are all my sales doc type TA scenarios. So of the hundreds or perhaps thousands of business scenarios in which we use VA01, I'm only looking at the ones or running the test related to VA01 with the combination of this data change, the sales doc type TA. And the other persona is the InfoSecurity impact analysis. So security is also one of the top changes. In fact, configuration and security, or any data change, is more common in local accounts than ABAP. You know, your program changes. So if you look at your transport logs, you'll see table data as the most common change event in your local SAP account. And those data changes often or primarily focus on security roles and configuration. This happens to be a function module change, but within that function module change, we see there's an authority check object, specifically highlighting the sTabu RFC with this specific activity and field, and that will impact security. So what we do there is give you the transaction that invokes that code change, and the roles that have that code change, that have that T code that's impacted, and also the users here that use the transaction that has the role and also the role that the security role. The other 2 changes at the bottom relate to ACGRs. So those are your roles themselves. So when you're transporting a role, specifically what's changing oftentimes is the aggr tables or the security tables that look at field and data values that drive the security. So in any event, when you release this change in dev or QA, your security folks should have awareness of it and understand its impact not only to the security roles, but the folks who are executing the transactions that are impacted and the active accounts who have those roles. I hope you enjoyed this session covering LiveCompare Continuous Impact Analysis.